Hey everyone, welcome to the Chilling Hour, where the stories never let you sleep. My name is Ethan Morales. I'm 29 years old, and I swear what I'm about to tell you happened exactly the way I remember it. People can call me crazy all they want. I've already lost enough sleep, enough peace, enough of my damn mind over this. But I can't carry it alone anymore. It started in October of 2019, right before Halloween. I was living in a small town outside Lexington, Kentucky, where my mother's family owned a little property that backed up to an old cemetery. The Hollow Grove Cemetery, they called it. It wasn't big, maybe 2 or 3 acres, but the graves dated back to the 1800s. Most of the headstones were cracked, slanted, or covered in moss so thick you could barely read the names. I never really paid much attention to it growing up. It was just part of the landscape. Creepy at night, sure, but harmless. Until that night. My mom had passed away earlier that year, and I'd come back home to settle her things. I'd been sleeping in my old room again, staring out my window at the cemetery like I did when I was a kid. The house sat on a small hill, so from my window I could see the entire graveyard spread out under the moonlight, a sea of gray stones and black trees swaying in the cold wind. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was sitting on the porch, drinking a beer and scrolling my phone, when I heard something. A woman's voice. Soft, distant, like it was coming from the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was someone walking through the cemetery, maybe a mourner visiting a grave late. But the voice wasn't talking. It was singing. It was this low, haunting hum. No words, just this melody that made the hair on my neck stand straight up. I put my beer down and called out, "Hello? Someone there?" The singing stopped. I listened hard, nothing but the wind and crickets. Then, right as I was about to head inside, I heard it again. Closer this time. Coming from the back fence, where our yard ended and the cemetery began. Now, I don't know what possessed me to walk down there. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity. But I grabbed my flashlight and started toward the sound. The grass was wet from the evening dew, and the air smelled like dirt and rot. The closer I got, the colder it felt. The singing had stopped again, but I could feel something there. I shined my light across the cemetery fence. Nothing. Just gravestones, trees, and fog starting to roll across the ground. Then, my light landed on something white. A dress. There was a woman standing near the middle of the cemetery, her back to me. Long black hair down her back, wearing a white gown that fluttered even though the air was still. She wasn't moving, just standing there, looking at one of the graves. I thought maybe she was mourning or lost. "Ma'am?" I called. "Are you okay?" She didn't turn around. "Hey, you can't be in there this late. It's closed." Still nothing. So I climbed the fence. My boots sank a little into the soft earth as I landed. I walked carefully, shining the light ahead of me, calling out again. The woman hadn't moved an inch. I got maybe 10 feet away when she started to hum again. That same song, low and broken, like she was crying through it. "Ma'am?" I whispered. That's when she turned. Her face, God, her face wasn't right. Pale, sunken, with dark hollows around her eyes like she hadn't slept in centuries. And her mouth, it didn't move right when she hummed. It opened too wide, her jaw unhinging in a way that made my stomach twist. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. It flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Everything went black. The humming stopped. I heard footsteps. Not walking, dragging, like something being pulled through the dirt. I scrambled for the flashlight, my hands shaking. When I finally found it and got it to turn back on, she was gone. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Then I looked down. There were footprints in the soft earth, bare, small, and leading toward the woods behind the cemetery. I ran. I didn't even think. I just ran straight back to the house, jumped the fence, and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went back out to see if maybe I imagined it all. But when I reached the spot where she'd been standing, there was something new there. A grave. It wasn't one of the old ones. It looked fresh. The dirt was still dark, unsettled. But there was no name on the marker, just a stone cross stuck into the ground. That was enough for me. I packed up and went to stay with my friend Derek, who lived across town. A few nights later, though, Derek told me he'd heard something strange while I was asleep on his couch. Said he heard a woman humming from outside his house around 3 a.m. He thought maybe it was the TV, but when he muted it, it kept going. I didn't tell him anything. I just left the next day. Over the next week, things got worse. Wherever I went, hotel rooms, my truck, even a damn rest stop, I'd hear it. That same haunting tune. Always around 3 in the morning. Then came the dreams. In every one, I was standing in that cemetery again. The fog was thick, and that woman was waiting for me by the fresh grave. Only this time, I could see the tombstone clearly. It had my name on it. Ethan Morales, 1990-2019. When I'd wake up, my body would feel cold, damp, like I'd been lying in the ground. I started researching Hollow Grove Cemetery, hoping maybe I could find out who she was. That's when I found the story of Margaret Hale, a woman buried there in 1893. She'd been accused of witchcraft after her husband and son died mysteriously. Town records said her grave was desecrated multiple times by locals who believed she'd cursed the land. The rumor was anyone who disturbed her grave or entered her part of the cemetery after dark would be claimed, and I had been right where her grave should have been. I tried everything to shake it. Church, sage, therapy, moving states, nothing worked. The humming always followed me. Then, last December, I decided to go back. I thought maybe if I put things right, cleaned up her grave, said a prayer, it would stop. It was snowing when I arrived, and the cemetery was silent except for the crunch of my boots. I brought flowers, even said a few words, apologizing if I'd offended her. For a while, it felt peaceful, like she'd accepted it. But when I turned to leave, I saw movement between the trees. A figure in white. I froze. She stepped out from the fog, her face pale as bone, her black hair matted and wet. Her eyes were wide and empty. She opened her mouth, and that awful humming started again. I tried to run, but the snow was deep, and every step I took felt heavier, slower. Then I tripped over something hard sticking out of the ground. When I looked down, it was another grave marker. A small one. It read, "Here lies Ethan Morales." My blood went cold. I looked back up, and she was inches from my face. Her hand touched my cheek. It was so cold it burned. She leaned close and whispered in my ear, "Now you see." Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in my car outside the cemetery gates. My hands were covered in dirt. The flowers I brought were gone. I don't remember driving there. I don't remember leaving. But I know this. Ever since that night, things have gotten worse. Mirrors fog up on their own. Sometimes I see her reflection behind mine, smiling. I wake up with dirt under my nails, and my clothes smell like damp soil. A few weeks ago, I went back to check her grave again. But when I got there, the marker that had my name on it, it wasn't blank anymore. Someone had carved the date of my death. October 31st, 2024. That was 3 nights ago, and I'm still here. But I don't think I'm supposed to be. I can hear her right now, outside my window. She's humming again. If anyone finds this recording, don't go to Hollow Grove. Don't go near any grave that looks new, because she's still waiting, and she's still hungry. Story the end.
Story number 2.
My name is Rachel Porter, and I'm 34 years old. I live in a small town in southern Illinois, surrounded by fields, woods, and those quiet little roads that seem to stretch forever. I used to love the peacefulness of this place, the smell of rain in the summer, the sound of crickets at night. But after what happened last fall, I can't stand the silence anymore. It's too close to the silence I heard that night. It started when I took a part-time job photographing old cemeteries for a historical preservation group. They paid well for good photos of gravestones, especially the older ones. The goal was to document inscriptions before they were lost to time. I'd always had a fascination with old cemeteries anyway, so I thought, why not? There's a small cemetery about 20 minutes outside of town, Hollow Creek Cemetery. No one really goes there anymore. It's surrounded by rusted iron fencing, and half the graves are sunken or overgrown. The locals say the cemetery is haunted, but every small town has its ghost stories. Hollow Creek's tale was that during the 1800s, a family, the Miltons, were buried there after a fever epidemic. People claimed that sometimes, on foggy nights, you could hear a baby crying from the graves. I never believed any of it. The job required me to visit the place at sunset or early evening, since that's when the lighting was best. So one Friday in October, I packed my camera and tripod and drove out there alone. The air was crisp, and the trees were full of those orange and red leaves that make everything look almost too beautiful to be real. I parked near the gate and noticed right away how still it was. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots on the leaves. The cemetery looked exactly like something from an old horror movie. Tall grass, leaning headstones, a small chapel at the far end that looked ready to collapse. I started taking pictures. Everything was fine at first. I moved row by row, making sure to get close-ups of the names and dates. But as the sun dipped lower, the shadows started to stretch. That's when I heard it, the faintest whisper of a voice. It sounded like someone saying my name, Rachel. I froze. It was soft, almost tender. I looked around, but no one was there. I tried to tell myself it was the wind moving through the grass. I shook it off and kept going. About 20 minutes later, I reached the Milton family plot. Their graves were set in a small, fenced-off area, surrounded by ivy. There were 5 headstones, all in a neat row. The largest one belonged to Jonathan Milton, 1843 to 1891. His wife and 3 children were buried beside him. The smallest grave was their infant daughter, Clara, who died at just 6 months old. Something about that baby's grave made me uneasy. The headstone had deep cracks running through it, like veins. I took a few photos, then crouched down to read the inscription. "Sleep sweet, our angel." The words looked carved by hand, uneven and rough. As I adjusted my camera for another shot, I heard it again. A baby crying. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a cat or raccoon caught somewhere nearby. But then the sound got louder, closer, and it was definitely a baby. The cry rose and fell, echoing through the cold air. It made my skin crawl. I turned toward the trees, scanning the area with my flashlight. Nothing. Just darkness. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. The crying stopped as suddenly as it started, and in that silence I realized I'd been holding my breath. I told myself I was just freaking out. Maybe it was an echo from somewhere else. But then I noticed something. There were small handprints on the lower part of the Milton headstones. They were faint, but definitely there, smudged in the dirt and moss. I hadn't seen them before. I took a step back, uneasy. That's when I saw movement behind the chapel, just a flash of white, like someone darting behind the building. My heart started hammering. "Hey!" I shouted. "Who's there?" No one answered. I thought maybe it was a trespasser or a teenager messing around, so I decided to pack up and leave. But when I turned around to grab my bag, it was gone. I had set it right next to a gravestone, and now it wasn't there. I spun in circles, scanning the ground. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Then, from somewhere near the chapel, I heard it, my camera shutter clicking. Once, twice. Someone was taking pictures with my camera. I could see a faint light flickering through the chapel window. I felt sick. My instincts screamed to leave, but I needed my gear. It had my ID, my phone, everything. I walked toward the chapel, each step feeling heavier than the last. The closer I got, the colder it became. My breath came out in visible clouds. The air smelled different too, like damp wood and something sour, like old flowers. The chapel door was barely hanging on its hinges. I pushed it open slowly, and it creaked like something in pain. Inside, it was dark except for the weak glow of my camera's screen lying on the dusty floor, still clicking. The camera was aimed toward the back wall, taking pictures by itself. The air felt thick, like walking through water. I bent down and picked it up, and my blood ran cold. On the screen was the image it had just captured, a row of figures standing at the back of the chapel. 5 of them, pale, grayish-white, with hollow eyes and faint smiles. They looked human, but not alive. I spun around. There was no one there, just shadows. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the photos. In each shot, the figures were closer. In the last one, they were standing right behind me. That's when I felt it. A cold, dry hand brush against the back of my neck. I screamed and dropped the camera. I bolted out of that chapel and didn't stop running until I reached the gate. My car was right where I'd left it, but the passenger door was open. I hadn't opened it. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine sputtered and died. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried again. Nothing. Then I looked up and saw them. Through the windshield, standing among the graves, were 5 pale shapes, watching me. Their faces were blank, but I could feel their eyes on me. The baby's cry started again, louder this time, coming from inside the car. I screamed and hit the horn, but it didn't make a sound. The air felt like it was pressing against me, suffocating. I reached for my phone, but the screen was black. It wouldn't turn on. Suddenly, every window of the car fogged up. Words began to appear in the condensation. "Don't disturb us." I lost it. I yanked the door open and ran into the road. The night air burned my lungs. I kept running until I saw headlights, some old man in a pickup truck. He stopped and asked if I was okay. I couldn't even speak. He drove me back into town. I told him my car had broken down, but I didn't mention the rest. When I went back the next day with a tow truck, my car started just fine. My bag was on the passenger seat, zipped up neatly. But my camera was different. The photos were still on it. I tried deleting them, but they wouldn't go away. Every time I turned the camera on, that last photo, the one with the figures behind me, appeared again, even after I formatted the card. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a soft noise in my room. It was the same sound as that night, a baby crying. It was faint, like it was coming from the walls. I moved out of that house within a month, but it didn't stop. Every October, around the same date, my camera turns on by itself, no matter where I am. It clicks once, then shuts off. Last year, I took it to a camera repair shop in St. Louis. The guy there opened it up and called me over. He looked pale as he showed me the inside. There was a thin layer of black ash coating the circuits, and stuck in the lens housing was something small and brittle. It was a piece of a human baby's tooth. He asked me if I wanted it back. I told him no. I left the camera there and never went back. But I think something followed me. 2 nights ago, I woke up to that same soft crying again. I turned on the light, and there, on my nightstand, was my old camera, the one I left at the shop. It was turned on, and on the screen there was a new picture, me sleeping. The next morning, I checked the camera again, but the photo was gone, like it had never been there. I don't know what they want or why they keep coming back, but I know one thing for sure. I disturbed something that night at Hollow Creek. Something that doesn't rest. If you ever find yourself near that place, don't go in after dark. Don't listen for the crying. And if you hear your name whispered in the wind, don't answer, because they'll know you heard them, and they'll never stop watching. Story the end.
Story number 3.
My name is Rebecca Miller, and I'm 34 years old. I never believed in ghosts, not really. Not until last year. I used to laugh at those ghost hunting shows on TV, the ones where people wave around gadgets and scream over creaky floors. But what happened to me in September of 2023 at the Greenwood Cemetery in Ohio, that changed everything. I don't think I'll ever set foot near a graveyard again. It started because of my job. I'm a photographer, mostly nature and architecture, but I also take freelance gigs for magazines. A local history publication reached out asking if I could photograph old cemeteries across the state. They wanted something eerie but respectful, perfect for their Halloween edition. Easy money, I thought. I'd already shot churches, abandoned barns, and even old battlefields. Cemeteries didn't scare me. They were quiet, peaceful. Greenwood was my last stop. It's one of the oldest cemeteries in Ohio, dating back to the 1800s, tucked behind a dense line of oak trees. I drove there on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, figuring I'd finish before sunset. The air was cool, with that early autumn chill that makes everything smell like leaves and damp earth. When I pulled up, the place was deserted. No caretaker, no visitors, just rows of crooked headstones and a rusted iron gate that groaned when I pushed it open. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, in a melancholic kind of way. There were angels with moss-covered wings, graves so old the names had eroded off completely, and tall monuments that looked ready to topple. I started setting up my camera near the older section, where the trees grew close together and the light filtered through like gray lace. I snapped a few shots, close-ups of carvings, wide angles of rows fading into fog. The silence was heavy, broken only by the click of my shutter and the distant sound of wind moving through branches. After about an hour, I noticed something strange in one of the frames. When I zoomed in on my camera's screen, there was a faint blur behind a row of tombstones, a pale figure, almost transparent. My first thought was that it was just lens flare or fog. But when I looked up from the camera, there was no mist. The air was clear. I took another shot, and the figure was gone. I laughed it off, told myself it was nothing, and kept moving. But the atmosphere started to change. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold. My breath came out in visible puffs, even though it wasn't that chilly when I arrived. The woods surrounding the cemetery had gone completely still. Not a single bird, not a single sound. I decided to take a few last shots and call it a day. That's when I heard it, the sound of whispering. Faint at first, like a breeze brushing past my ear. I froze. It came again, this time clearer. Multiple voices, overlapping, murmuring words I couldn't understand. I spun around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. I told myself it had to be the wind pushing through the trees, but the air was completely still. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I tried to shake it off, but the whispering kept following me, shifting direction every time I moved. Then I heard my name. It was soft, almost childlike. Rebecca. I swear, I felt my stomach drop. I turned around so fast, I nearly tripped over a headstone. There was a small grave in front of me, cracked marble, with faded lettering that read Emily Carter, 1891 to 1902. A child's grave. I don't know why, but I knelt down. The whispering stopped completely, replaced by total silence. And then, clear as day, I heard it again, but this time it was right behind me. Rebecca, play with me. I spun around, but no one was there. My camera slipped from my hands and hit the ground, lens first. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness, but from raw fear. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I knew something was there, something watching me. I backed away, trembling. That's when I noticed the ground around Emily's grave. It was freshly disturbed, like someone had recently dug there. The soil was darker, wetter than the rest, and right at the edge of the mound was a small, dirt-covered handprint. I told myself to leave, just leave. But before I could take another step, I heard laughter, high-pitched, giggling laughter that echoed through the graves. It wasn't distant anymore, it was all around me. I snatched my camera from the ground and ran toward the gate. But the path seemed wrong. No matter which direction I turned, the graves looked the same. The trees loomed closer, thicker. My car was nowhere in sight. I started to panic, my breathing shallow and uneven. I thought I was losing it. Then I saw her. A little girl standing about 20 feet away, wearing a white dress stained with dirt. Her hair hung wet and tangled over her face. She was barefoot, her feet black with mud. She tilted her head slightly, like she was studying me. Emily? I whispered before I could stop myself. Her head twitched when I said the name. She lifted her face just enough for me to see her eyes. Empty, black, hollow sockets. And her mouth stretched into this impossible grin. I screamed and ran, crashing through rows of gravestones, not caring where I was going. I tripped, scraped my knee, and dropped my camera again, but I didn't stop. I could hear footsteps behind me. Small, quick, running footsteps. By some miracle, I burst through the gate and stumbled into the gravel path where my car was parked. I jumped in, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I looked up, and she was standing at the gate, still smiling. Her head tilted, her hands slowly waving goodbye. I drove like a maniac all the way home. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. My camera was still in the passenger seat, the lens cracked, dirt smeared across the body. The next morning, I forced myself to look through the photos. Most were fine. But when I got to the last few, the ones near Emily's grave, something made my blood run cold. In the frame where I'd first seen that blur, it was now perfectly clear. A little girl standing behind a headstone, staring straight at the camera. Her dress was filthy, her eyes pitch black, and in the next photo, she was closer. Then closer still. In the final image, she was right in front of the lens, her mouth open in a scream I could feel. I deleted every photo, packed up my gear, and tried to forget. But it didn't stop there. For weeks afterward, I'd wake up to the sound of whispering. Always around 3 a.m., always near my bed. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was my name. Once, I woke up and saw tiny muddy footprints leading from my bedroom door to the foot of my bed, and then back toward the window. I tried to rationalize it, sleep paralysis, dreams, my mind playing tricks. But then something happened that destroyed any doubt I had left. One night, I woke up and found my camera sitting on my dresser. I hadn't touched it in weeks. It turned on by itself. The screen flickered, and a new photo appeared, one I hadn't taken. It was me, asleep in bed. And standing beside me was the same little girl in white, her face inches from mine. I screamed, grabbed the camera, and threw it out the window. The next morning, I found it lying in the grass below, screen cracked but still glowing. That photo was gone, but the dirt was still on the lens. I moved out of that apartment a week later. I still have nightmares about her. I'll be walking through a foggy cemetery, camera in hand, and I'll hear the whisper, "Rebecca," right behind me. I've tried therapy, I've tried prayer, I've tried convincing myself it was all a breakdown brought on by stress. But deep down, I know better. Because 2 weeks ago, I got a package in the mail. No return address, no note, just a small, dirt-streaked envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was that same picture from the cemetery, the one with Emily standing behind the tombstone, smiling at the camera. Only this time, there was something new. Behind her, half hidden by the fog, was another figure, a woman. Pale, long hair hanging over her shoulders. Her face looked exactly like mine. I don't take cemetery jobs anymore. I don't take pictures at all. I sold all my equipment. But some nights, when the wind picks up outside and the world goes still, I swear I can hear it again. Soft, childish whispering just beyond the wall. "Rebecca, come back and play." Story, the end.